welcome to episode 232 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian, having finished my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Liz Geo in Australia, Chris in Florida, Hope in Missouri, Stephanie in New Hampshire, Susan in New Jersey, Lindsay in Wisconsin. Shout out to the League of Ladies, whose witty banter has kept me company long after our goodbyes last week in Chicago. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Be sure to listen to episode 224. I announce a new sponsorship with Literati Book Fairs. And now here's a chance to hear from one of Literati's book fair veterans, Caroline Carr. Caroline Carr, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Amy. Happy to be here.
So, Caroline, I learned in a recent conversation that you and I had that you've had 3 Literati book fairs. You know, I'm so impressed because I'm new to this Literati team, and I'm wondering, can you give me an idea? You've always had book fairs; they're a necessity. But what is it that inspired you to say, you know what, I need to do something new. I need to do something different because, you know, that's a lot to change and have to learn a whole new system. And you take a risk by switching it up. So what is it that inspired you to make that decision?
Well, I was a little nervous about it. I'm not going to lie, but one of the librarians who was in my district had already hosted one, and she's like, "You're going to love it, Caroline. Try it out." And I was very frustrated at the time with the selection from my other book fair. They sent a highlight reel, and I showed it to all the kids in my school, and then they only sent me 1 or 2 copies of the books in that highlight reel. And I have like 1,200 kids. So like, that does not work for me. So I was like, well, I'm going to try it. And then it was great. I loved it. I'm Literati for life now. I'm like, you know, it worked out better than I even expected, even hoped for.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that because I know there are a lot of people who are sort of on the fence about trying something new. And in this case, it really turned out well. And are you going to be scheduling more Literati book fairs in the future?
I already have 2 scheduled for next year.
That's fantastic. Caroline Carr, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Anytime.
I learned so much about Literati from the librarians who've had an opportunity to host their book fairs. Friends, tune in to learn all about them and their generous offer. Librarians who book their first Literati book fair before July 31st for this upcoming fall and mention the code UNITED will receive a $500 gift card from Titlewave. As always, there's a link in today's show notes. And now a word from Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. I'm grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for today's episode, Teaching Preschoolers, and my conversation with Patrick Adams and Caroline Legere. I'm so excited. You are in for a treat today. We've got two fantastic preschool librarians, and they're going to be sharing with us all sorts of tips and strategies. And first, let's welcome Patrick Adams. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
I feel like we just talked. You know, Patrick, listeners, be sure to tune in to Patrick's first visit onto the show, episode 227, when we discuss TikTok and how it supports our collection development, library programming, and building our collection. And it is then when I learned for the very first time that you taught preschoolers. And I'm pretty sure that I pounced on this opportunity to have you come back to the show sooner rather than later. But Patrick, you were adamant that we include Caroline Legere with us.
Yes.
So tell me, how long have you guys been working together in this group of sort of cohort of preschool librarians?
Yes. So I actually met Caroline 7 years ago. At that time, she was a classroom teacher. She was a preschool teacher, a special ed teacher in a classroom. And she was working on her degree to become a librarian. And when she became the pre-K librarian at the other campus that our district has, we were so excited because that meant that we could collaborate together.
You know, that teamwork across buildings has to happen because the likelihood of you ever having two of you in the same building is nil. Caroline, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining this conversation, although I don't think we really gave you an opportunity to say no.
No, thank you so much for having me here, though. I'm really honored to be here. I've listened to your podcast for years, but I became a school librarian in 2019, and that's when I started listening to you. That because I started during COVID, it was really difficult to get good information. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And there were one of those silver linings to the pandemic is that it put us in a situation of having to be really clever and doing things that we would otherwise not find ourselves resorting to. But virtual learning is one of those, and podcasts are always pandemic proof. So let's go ahead and, Patrick, why don't you get us started? Give us an idea of where in the world you work. You've already given us a little hint about where you work, and how long have you been working with our littlest of littles?
Sure. So Caroline and I both work in the same school district in North Texas. So I've been working with the pre-K kids for 7 years. Prior to that, I taught third and fourth grade for a total of 8 years. So jumping from the older elementary kids down to pre-K was a huge jump, but it was really exciting, and I found that it's been a great opportunity.
I think this is very reassuring because there are a lot of people for whom the idea of teaching littles is already daunting. And then when we're talking, am I correct, 3 and 4 year olds, all of a sudden you've increased that difficulty level. So Caroline, I'm really curious because you're a school librarian, you were in the classroom, but you've only ever taught preschool library?
Yeah, I'm starting my 16th year of education. That's how long it's been. I forget how long I've been in. And for the first 12 years in the classroom, I taught various levels of pre-K with different levels of special education. I did a couple of years in general education. The only thing I haven't taught is bilingual. But now in 2019, I started as a pre-K librarian in Keller ISD. And so now I really, really love it because I get to do all those levels that I've done before, but in the library. So I get to apply it everywhere and do it all the time. And it's wonderful. I love it so much.
What I'm hearing is, no experience is ever wasted. And in conversations with librarians like yourself, it sounds like every time we do something, it may not be a direct path, but when we eventually find ourselves in the library, all those skills come into play. At some point or another, our previous talents and learned skills find their way rising to the surface when we need them to be there. For the sake of continuity, I'm going to structure our questions very much along the lines of an earlier conversation, episode 140, Teaching Littles in Our Libraries, and my conversation with Kelly Burbage. So let's start off with a softball. What do you both love about teaching preschoolers in the library?
Well, my favorite thing about this age level is how applicable everything is to their lives. Like, it's pretty much all life skills because they're all, like, they don't know their ABCs. They don't know how to walk in a line. A lot of them don't know their name. A few of them, well, probably about 25% of our students don't know, like, even how to speak at all. So, like, because I really like teaching the more basic skills because I know that every single thing is imperative for their success.
That just makes it sound so heavy. Like that, what a responsibility. I mean, you both carry a huge responsibility. This is their first sort of formal entry into formal education, and you get to be there for it.
I know. We get to lay the foundation for their success for, like, their whole lives. It's amazing. And we get to see such amazing progress.
I imagine that from when you start until those kids, looking at them from the beginning and then at the end of the school year, it's just leaps and bounds. What about you, Patrick? What do you find so validating about being a preschool librarian?
There's a lot that we do that makes me smile, but the thing that I love most about teaching pre-K is just the pure chaos. You can have the best plan and it will always go off the rails in one way or another. The kids are so random, and some of the things they say will take us so off course, and it's an adventure for me as well as the kids. And so, we might be planning to head in one direction and we're going to go wherever it takes us, wherever the conversation leads, and we just kind of end up somewhere random. And it's so fun for me because it keeps me on my toes,
I've spoken to a lot of educators, librarians included, who really love the fact that we can control our space, and it's something for which we have a lot of agency and we have a lot of ability to do things in our space. But I'll tell you, you got to let go of this idea that we can control the kids. Because if that is something that you think you have, well, good luck. Because I don't think this is just particular to our preschoolers. I would imagine librarians at every level of the age groups that we support are finding that students are going to express that ability to direct what we have and do so in a way that supports what they need at that time. It's sort of, like you said, it's an adventure. And I think what makes me an important reminder is that we have to remind ourselves that ultimately our students are the ones benefiting from this activity. We're not doing this for our benefit. We're doing this for theirs. So I love that idea. So let's go ahead. I'm hoping that we, given your expertise in this area, there are a lot of listeners. Let's be mindful of the people who are tuning in right now. Some have probably had opportunities to work with preschoolers. Some have raised preschoolers. But there are probably more than a few listeners who have just found themselves having to teach the littlest of littles and really struggling. And may I also include some of those veteran kindergarten and first grade librarians who, thanks to the pandemic, many of our incoming, like kindergartners and first graders and second graders, depending on where they were during that year where we were completely, and most of us never stepped foot in a school, really did set them back developmentally. So I think this is a really important conversation to have. I understand that we rarely, this is completely out of our control probably, but what have you found in your district has worked in terms of the length of a visit of pre-K? Because I encountered one conversation on Facebook where some poor soul had pre-K and kindergarten for 50 minutes. It just seemed like cruel to both the students and the librarian because 50 minutes, it really seems like overkill. So, Patrick, what do you think has really worked when you work with your students when it comes to time?
Yeah, so in the 7 years that I've been doing this, the timing has changed a little bit each year, depending on, the number of classes we have to see in the week and that kind of thing. So I've gone from anywhere from about 20 minutes to about 35 to 40 minutes. And I think the sweet spot is somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes for the kids. I find that, that's enough time to get them in, get them settled, go through the routines, read a story, probably do a dance and like one other little activity, or do like Makerspace, and then send them on their way. With these kids being so young, you need to be able to kind of bounce from activity to activity relatively quickly to keep their attention, because when you lose their attention, that's kind of when everything goes off the rails.
Is that the same for you, Caroline?
Yes, I agree. I think because we have quite a few special education classes, about over half of our classrooms are self-contained special education, and those kids need, I think, a smaller amount of time in the library. I think 20 minutes is probably good for them, because those are our kids that are more nonverbal and need less time sitting and more active play and things like that. For our general education kids, those ones, I prefer to have like 15 minutes of story time and then like 20 to 30 minutes afterward for like a Makerspace time, so we can do some kind of a literacy connection, do cross-curricular things with them.
Are you providing release time for the teachers? And I guess I'm wondering about release time, and if one of you would speak to whether you have those paras that come with your special education students.
We do. We have pairs that come with every single class, actually, because even our general education students aren't really general education. They all have to qualify to come. So the qualifiers are having ever been in foster care, a parent on active duty in the military, low income, or ESL. So all of them are at risk in some way. Those are the qualifiers for general education. So because those kids are all at risk, even though there's only 22 students maximum, hopefully, they still come with an aid because they are all at risk, and we do have a lot of behaviors from our general education students. They're still learning how to act in the classroom, and they need help with toileting and things like that. So yeah, we are very fortunate that we get paras with every classroom. And we do have a couple of floating paras that go to our special education classes as well, because they are more high needs. So we have 1 to 2 paras, depending on the class and the size and the needs of the students, that come with every time.
How about you, Patrick? Do you have, are teachers coming with the preschoolers, or are you providing them with their release time?
So yeah, I'm covering their planning period for them. So our teachers on my campus get an hour of planning every day. And so this year, the way it's been is they come to me in the library for half an hour, and then the group that is with the PE teacher for half an hour, we kind of switch halfway through. And so they get a lot of activity out in the gym, and then they come to the library for story time, or vice versa. And so, yeah, the paras all come with their classes on my campus. So we have at least one para in the room with us. This year, my campus tried to do some more integration. So I had a general ed class of 22 kids, and then one of our special needs classes came with them. And so that was another 8 to 10 students. And so most of the time I had 2 paras in the room to help with the 30 plus students that were with me.
I was very aware when I taught littles that the classes that came in the morning oftentimes had a different dynamic than the classes that came in the afternoon. And you were always keenly aware of if the kids had just come from recess. So I appreciate, Patrick, when you tag out with the gym teacher, that also has something to do with it. But oftentimes for me, I struggled because in some cases, my afternoon kids who came in were like exhausted, which I suppose on one hand means they're less rambunctious. On the other hand, sometimes they just fall asleep right there at the table. So have you Caroline, have you found there to be sort of a different dynamic when you have your very littles in the library, the morning group versus the after lunch group?
Yeah, we actually had to, because we've only been full day I think we just finished year 2 of full day. So we've still been kind of playing with our schedule and how to do all that. And yeah, we made that mistake our first year. Yeah, Yeah, we sure did, where we tried to schedule all of our classes like 8:30 to 10:30 and then take a break and then come back at like 1. And that 1 o'clock group, we had teachers pulling kids in wagons because they were still asleep from nap time. And it was, there were a lot of behaviors in that class because they were just so tired. They need their rest. So now we have it from like 8:30 to 11:30, and then we take a break. And then 2 to 3 is our last section of classes.
Yeah. How about you, Patrick? You're laughing. I mean, I'm sorry. So much of this, friends, I haven't taught preschool since, I'm going to say it's been more than a decade, but I'll tell you what, it is definitely memorable.
Yeah, in the 7 years, every year that I've taught, we've kind of done something different. Like the schedule always changes. The first couple of years, we were half day, and our state has really pushed for full day pre-K. And so our district has followed suit with that. And so the last couple of years, we've done the full day, which means naps and stuff like that. And so this past year, we did from 8:30 to about 11, and then we pick up again at 1 o'clock. And yeah, that 1 o'clock group, if they didn't sleep, it was a rough group. And you could tell which students never slept because they were always struggling, whether it was falling asleep or just being in just a really grumpy mood and just not wanting to participate, just that attitude of not having it at all, you know? And so, yeah, the napping, if they slept, it helped a lot. It was just, you can't force kids to sleep. It's like this past year, I had to do nap duty coverage in a special ed classroom where kids were literally just trying to climb up the walls for an hour. And like, there's only so much you can do to try and convince them that sleeping is the best thing for them.
Well, and I'm just going to say this as somebody who taught elementary and now is teaching high school. You know, trying to get any sort of response out of a high school student in that first hour of the day, you're like, it's not going to happen. Because, by the way, they're not even going to get to school till the school's already started for half an hour. Like, a lot of times, like, they're trickling in so slowly because they drive themselves to school. And I'm like, well, it's nice of you to join us today. Or they're half asleep because, oh, by the way, they didn't go to sleep until 2 o'clock in the morning. So, friends, this whole like being tired and sleepy and non-responsive in the library is not something that just the preschool librarians have to deal with. We all do. It's just, I think a lot of it has to do with what causes that problem in the first place. And a lot of times, depending on how old your students get, I do remember that the Monday after the Super Bowl was a disaster for us because our students were allowed, I'm talking about my elementary kids, were allowed to stay up and watch the Super Bowl. And they'd be all excited and they'd come to school and they were just useless. They were useless the next day. Oh my goodness. So I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about the procedures that work for you in your space. And we have to talk about safety first, because that is always the first thing that should be on everybody's mind. Let's talk about stairs and doors. So what have you had to do to and because you're in schools which have littles, and maybe this has been addressed on a building-wide basis, but for some of us it isn't. When it comes to stairs and doors, we have to be mindful of how our students can escape. We have flight risks. We have escape artists. What kinds of protocols do you have in place to take into consideration that we have to put safety first?
So in my library, in my story time area, it's not really separate, but the way I have it set up, I have shelving that houses like my Makerspace items and stuff like that. And so I kind of have it sectioned off from the rest of the library. So when the students come into the library, they go to the carpet, to the rug, to sit down, and they're kind of in that enclosed space. That is already a way to kind of keep some of those elopers from trying to run off. But they always try. So that's when we also strategically place the para near the exit. I'm fortunate on my campus, it's all one floor, so we don't have to deal with stairs. It's just those doors. And so we make sure that we close those doors when those particular friends come into the library to give them one more thing to have to get through before they run down the hallway, which has also happened. The way my storytime area is set up, it's kind of secluded and kind of blocked off from the rest of the library so that some of those friends have a smaller area to work in. And I find that keeping them in that area, as it becomes routine, they're less likely to try and flee to other parts of the room.
Cool. How about you, Caroline?
My library is structured very differently from Patrick's because when my school was built, they didn't intend for there to be a library. They got 2 rolling carts and said, go. Here you go. It's flexible. It's more convenient for you. And they figured out really fast that didn't work. So my library is just 2 classrooms with a folding wall in the middle, and the folding wall is always open. So it's kind of weirdly structured, so I can't put shelving in the way or anything the way Patrick has his designed. So I have several of our classrooms actually have this, but we got some big blue screens from I think Lakeshore makes them. They're about 5 feet by 5 feet, and it's just a big plastic, somewhat sturdy plastic sheet that's kind of held on by PVC pipe. And we just kind of move that toward the exits if we have a runner so that the kids are blocked and they can't run away. I also know of a couple of teachers on our campus who have gotten some of those little door alarms that you hear ding when you go into a convenience store so that they know if a child is trying to escape. So that seems to have worked really well for some of our classes as well.
Now, that's a good point. I know a lot of my classroom teachers, if they have elopers, they've gotten things for their doorknobs that basically lock the doorknobs so that they have to push 2 buttons while lowering a lever to get the door to open. So that doesn't work in my library because it's a push bar door, but they have that in the classroom.
I have vivid recollections. My library where I taught my preschoolers had three exits, and 2 of them were to the staff parking lot. And so it was a little concerning because, for obvious reasons. And we did have runners. And so I did the thing where you try and disguise the door as something else. And then the fire marshal came in, and the fire marshal said, you can't cover up the door. So all I was trying to do is I put seasonal flags over the windows so that the kids saw the seasonal flag. They didn't see the window out to the parking lot because, I'm sure this is going to be an issue. And so the fire marshal did not like the fact that I disguised the door. Again, I had a press bar like you do. And you're right, strategically moving the available adults around the room, if you have an assistant or if you have paras, is probably your best line of defense. But you do have to have that protocol if you do have runners. And it's something you just have to recognize. Another thing is, I've taught in libraries where I was on the 3rd floor. And 3rd floor, 47 steps. Why? Because my assistant counted all 47 of them every time she walked up them and announced that she had arrived. But my littles had to do those, and you could hear them coming. So it was like your little advance warning. You'd hear them echoing up the stairwell. But it becomes an issue when you have to leave quickly, which segue to our next topic, fire drills. So I will tell you right now, doing a fire drill or any we had to get out of the building quickly when you had 47 steps and you had these little guys, it was a real problem because invariably those fire drills happened. And I had my kinders and my littles up on the 3rd floor going, all right, let's do this, everybody. So how about you, Caroline? How do you deal with fire drills? Because I know you have to have them by law. And this is scary for the kids. I'm guessing most of them put their hands over their ears. How are fire drills handled in your building?
Well, since we are all pre-K, our administration is very aware of how difficult that transition can be as far as getting everybody out of the building. So they do intentionally try and not schedule the fire drills during a time when the kids are going to be out of the classroom. So we are lucky in that way. But what we do is we have our assigned locations like you do at any building, and then we, take count of all the kids that are there. We do have a lot of wagons, at least probably one per special education classroom, so that if there is a runner, like we can put the kids in the wagons and buckle them in there so that they can't escape and we can keep them safer. I've also, as a general education teacher, I knew there were a couple of times where I knew I had some kids that might not be able to get out with everybody else. They might get distracted by the loud noises. So I have had everybody hold hands in the general education class when those kids can do that. They have that ability. So I've had them all hold hands so that we can all get outside safely. That makes it a little bit difficult because you can't walk single file that way. So they kind of have to walk sideways. So that's a little bit challenging, but nobody got lost.
A win is a win is a win. How about you, Patrick?
So I'm jealous that Caroline's administration chooses not to do fire drills when the kids are out of the classroom. That's nice. My administration was not that friendly to us. I will say that at the beginning of the year, they generally, the first one or two, they would do it in the classroom so the kids got used to it first. But after that, I think I had 6 fire drills with students this year. So it's kind of crazy. Fortunately, none of them are surprise fire drills. We always know when they're going to happen. So I look at my schedule beforehand to know what class I'm going to have. When that class walks in, once they're on the carpet and ready for the lesson, I explain to them up front that we're going to have the fire drill. I remind them that it's just a practice, that it's not a real fire, that we're just practicing, making sure that we get out safely. It's okay to cover your ears as long as you're walking in the right direction, following the student in front of you, that kind of thing. I explain where we're going, how we're going to get there, all of that stuff to prep the kids in advance. For the general education students, for the special education classrooms, when they come in, usually we try to get any extra person in the building. So the speech teachers, maybe front office staff, somebody else to give us an extra set of hands to get those kids out, because we do have wagons for some of those sped students, but there's just too many kids. Our special ed classes were 8 to 10 kids a piece, easy. So you can only fit at best 2 kids into a wagon and you still get 6 or 8 extra kids to get out of the building. So extra hands to grab and just lead those kids out safely. And there are some kids that those sounds completely set them off. And so we made sure we had the headphones for them beforehand and that kind of thing to help them deal with the sound. But it's chaos, but the more we practice it, honestly, they did really well by the end of the year. It's just getting those routines down.
Well, and managed chaos is still a win. There is. It's still a win because safety comes first, and it may not be pretty, but it's a priority. So I will share with you a very real memory. I did not manufacture this, but when I was in preschool, which was a long time ago, first of all, it did not happen here in the United States. I was in Tokyo. My parents lived in Tokyo, and I was 3, and I had a fire drill, and my preschool was on the 2nd floor of a building, and our fire, you won't forget this, because it is if you can imagine a corkscrew slide that's covered, okay? So a covered corkscrew slide that emptied in the sand pit in the playground. So my building, when we had a fire, anytime we had to leave the building for an emergency, and unfortunately we did not get to practice this often because it made it very special, is we went and lined up at the corkscrew slide that exited my preschool, and you took it into the sand pit on the 1st floor. It was the best day ever, and apparently I came home and had to tell my family about it. I'm like, why isn't this a thing? Now, obviously, for those of us on the 3rd floor, that's a little daunting, but to put everybody on a slide down it was genius, and it was absolutely genius. I've never encountered a school like it, but we're going to make some podcast history right now, friends. In the 5 years that we've been broadcasting, never once have we brought up toileting as a topic for conversation. So my apologies to all of you. We are talking I'm going to back that one up. It did come up in conversation with occupational hazards of being a school librarian, because leaving the library has been an issue because we oftentimes don't have that coverage, and it's an occupational hazard if you have to wait until the bells, or if you don't really have a tag-in, tag-out system to get you to use the restroom. I have it on good authority from a urologist who thinks that educators on the whole are the worst because we don't listen to our bodies. And I said, try being an educator, and then we can have this conversation again. So let's talk about toileting. We're talking about the children in this case. So Patrick, help me out. We are dealing with children oftentimes who, if they are toilet trained, they are barely toilet trained. And my experience has been these kids always come to school with several replacement clothing items, and this is just par for the course. So what has worked for you, especially when your kiddos are coming to the library? What protocols do you have in place?
So my library is one of 2 rooms in the building that students have access to that don't have a restroom in them. It's the library and the gym are the 2 rooms that don't have bathrooms in the building. Fortunately, there are restrooms in the hallways relatively close. They just have to go out the main door of the library and kind of turn around, and the restrooms are there. But leaving the room with all of those kids is almost impossible. So what it ends up being is that I generally don't deal with it. The paras are the ones that end up having to deal with it because I'm the one leading the lesson. So I'll continue to lead the lesson, and the paras will kind of take the kids out and take care of that. In the random case when there's an accident, we have to have the custodian come in and clean up the carpet or whatever. That's happened multiple times. But, yeah. So most of the time, if a kid says that they need to, they'll raise their hand and say, I need to go to the bathroom or whatever. So I just send them with a para, and the para can take them out into the hallway over to the restrooms. The other part to that is that it's also just kind of like me being a guy with 3 and 4-year-old children. I don't like to place myself in any situation where there could be question. And so I always let the other women, I'm one of 2 men on the campus, so everybody else is women that deals with the children. So I let one of the women take the children to the restroom, just so that way there's never a question of that. I don't know, something that we just have to kind of be mindful with in our society.
Unfortunately, it has to be said, and I'm glad you did. And unfortunately, you're obviously living with the reality of where we are in this day and time. How about you, Caroline? What have you found procedurally works for you when it comes to issues of toileting and kids coming to your library?
Well, I am luckier than Patrick in this case because for my library, since it was 2 classrooms that were smushed together, has 2 bathrooms. So I actually have my own private bathroom for me that I let other faculty use. And then I know. And then I also have the student bathroom. So yeah, I'm really lucky. We do have a lot of kids, though, that are still in diapers. And actually, that's why I went into librarianship in the first place, if I'm being honest, is as a classroom teacher, I was very happy and I wanted to keep teaching and I wanted to keep working with littles, but I didn't want to retire as someone who was, as a 60-year-old woman having to lift up a 40-pound child onto a changing table. And I didn't want to keep doing that. So that was actually what started this journey for me. So our parents are the ones who take our kids, if they are in diapers and they need a diaper change, they'll take them back to the classroom. And they go take care of that.
Caroline is friends, Caroline's a longtime listener, and she's definitely benefited from the fact that she knows that this is a safe space for school librarians to share, and we are in a judgment-free zone. Doesn't mean we are going to laugh at you, but we are judgment-free. And friends, you are speaking to a very receptive audience. I do want to make mention, because if you happen to be somebody who has only ever taught older students, middle school, high school students, you may not realize that in many of these cases, our littles have bathrooms which have been customized for their size. And so I know when I taught, we call them young fives, so these would be 4-year-olds. And I actually ended up teaching them in their room because there weren't any little toilets on the 3rd floor. So this was the request of the teacher, and I honored it, obviously. But the teacher said, listen, Amy, it's not that we don't want to come to the library, but in addition to the 3 flights of stairs, our bigger issue is toileting. Because when the students, and I didn't have a para, so when the students left to go use the toilets on the 3rd floor, those were all full-size, adult-size toilets. And our little guys, like, friends, if you're in a high school or middle school, you don't realize, remember back elementary classrooms, oftentimes for our little guys, like kinders, they would have a smaller commode or something that's a little bit shorter, or you'd have the little steps. And either way, you had some modifications, which if you're in a regular bathroom, this is prohibitive to a little guy, to our very little kids. So it's something you have to consider. This is not something you can just blissfully go about your business and ignore. So thank you for indulging us with this important conversation. Let's talk about meltdowns, shall we? And we're not talking about librarian meltdowns, because if that's coming, you need to excuse yourself and find your way to a place where you could perhaps Caroline's private bathroom, It's like, I'm not kidding, because in my workroom, it is not unusual for somebody to come in, close the door, and I'm just going to give them their space. We have a workroom, and it's not unusual for somebody to come in. You can see the tears, you can see the frustration, and they just need a safe space to have that meltdown. So we're talking about the meltdown of the children. I had a very unfortunate situation. I was working with a very hyper-vigilant administrator who sort of had that gotcha culture, kind of wanted to catch you doing something wrong, and invariably would walk in when one of my, several of my, unfortunately we call them criers. They were kids who just would fall to pieces, and do so always when the administrator was walking through my library. And it was not a good day. But let's talk about student meltdowns. It happens. So Caroline, how have you learned to deal with the meltdowns that come with working with these very littles?
Well, it does happen a lot, especially in the first probably couple of months of school. You just kind of have to accept that it's going to be happening pretty much every day for the first few months. And I think it's probably more frequent at our campuses, not only because of the age level, but because foster care is one of the qualifiers for gen ed students. So we have a lot of trauma, and there's also a lot of kids that have low socioeconomic status that have been through some trauma as well. And same with our special ed kids, because those guys, not only do they have potentially a neurological disorder that would make them more likely to have meltdowns, but then kids who are in special ed are 6 more times likely to be abused. And since they're nonverbal, they can't tell us that yet. So a lot of the time there's underlying issues that we can't even see yet. For me, we just have to be really, really sensitive to the trauma that they may have been through, because we just don't know what they're going through. You kind of have to read their cues, because sometimes it is just that the kid has never been told no, and it's just hard to hear the word no. And sometimes you just have to let them cry it out, because that's just, they have to deal with that. That's a life skill that we're teaching them. But then oftentimes it is trauma is behind it. So you have to kind of read the situation a whole lot.
Right now, librarians at every grade level is nodding their heads because they have said no to a student, and they look at you with incredulity like, I'm sorry, what? You said no? And all of us have encountered those students who have, apparently they're running the show at home. I mean, it is very abundantly clear when we encounter some of these students for whom they are entirely, in control of the situation at home. No one has ever told them no, and you are the first one to do it. So we are going to be apoplectic about this. And by the way, that's across all grade levels, because as somebody who teaches high school, I've had to call security a couple times on some students I said no to, and it was not pretty. So, Patrick, how about you? When it comes to a student meltdown, what are you finding to be the best course of action?
Yeah, so like Caroline said, a lot of it is trauma. I learned really early on not to ask kids how their weekend was because they'll be honest with you. I would greet kids in the morning, hey, how was your weekend? And find out that so-and-so went to jail this weekend. And I stopped asking that question real quick because there's so much trauma. These kids are traumatizing me with their stories. You got to be really considerate of that. Like Caroline said, most of the meltdowns happen in the first couple months while they're still figuring out the routines. And so sometimes you got to let them just cry it out. Most of the time I have, like I said before, my storytime area is kind of enclosed. So if someone's having a hard time, we kind of guide them out of the storytime area to give them a spot where there's some soft seating where they can take a few deep breaths and kind of calm themselves down. One of the paras will kind of lead them over to that area so they can calm themselves down before they come back to the group. You know, if we're doing like Makerspace where the kids are all moving around, I'll kind of go over and just kind of talk to them and, you know, figure out what the deal is and help them get back to a place where they're ready to rejoin the group and continue. It really just depends on why the child's acting that way. I've found that in the last 2 years, basically since COVID, that no response is happening astronomically more. I think being at home with parents, while parents are trying to work from home, a lot of times kids are kind of just like given an iPad and kind of given free rein. And so now that they're coming to school, that no is completely new to them. So there's lots of different reasons why they're melting down. And so kind of trying to like get to know the kids so that you can figure out what some of their triggers might be, to kind of plan in advance, and then giving them that space, that calm space where they can cool back down before they rejoin us is what I tend to do most often.
I attended a really cool session last week at ALA, and one of the topics that came up were invisible disabilities. And I've not heard, this is an invitation. Anybody want to come and talk about invisible disabilities and how we address them with our students? But trauma is one of them. And understanding that we have, we need to educate ourselves better about our students, their individual needs. I realize we have a lot of students, but also the fact that oftentimes you can't see trauma. In fact, you really don't see what these students are experiencing at home. And as you have mentioned before, there is zero filter. So the children, especially at this age, have no filter. And they will say whatever comes to mind. And you sort of open yourselves up to that, depending on how you phrase your question. Classroom management is one of those things that if you don't have this locked down, this is an art. I think classroom management is an art. And it is one which every interview will include questions on how do you sort of have, what kind of classroom management do you use in your space? So Caroline, let's go ahead. Do you have any sort of winning strategies when it comes to like attention getters when you're addressing your group all together?
As far as classroom management goes, I always, and I did this in the classroom too as a pre-K teacher, I've always tried to naturally structure my lessons so that we were doing work and then some kind of play, work and play, work and play. And now as in the library, it's read a book and then we get to go play with the toys at the table. And obviously we make those literacy connections when we're playing with the toys at the table, but that's why I structured it that way, rather. And if the kids are getting kind of rambunctious, then I just remind them if they don't do their work, then they don't get to play, and kind of keep coming back to that. And I also have a visual schedule for them so that they can see this is the book we're going to read. I have a picture of all of the books that we have scheduled to read that day. And then at the end of it, I've got a picture of the tables because that's where we go play. So as we're reading the books, I'll take down the books that we've read. And then when we get to the play picture, and that's when they can go play. So that's just another visual for them. Sometimes I just have to point to that picture of the tables so that they remember this is what I'm working for.
Well, and I think consistency is key. How about you, Patrick? What has worked for you when it comes to trying to work with a large, group of kids?
Yeah, I don't use attention getters or call and response. I'm fortunate that being like the male teacher in the room, my voice is recognizable. So like if I need to get their attention because they're kind of going crazy, I just get a little bit louder and they all know to stop. And so I use that to my advantage to get their attention. But to work with the students, just like Caroline, we have a picture schedule and we keep to routines. The students find comfort in using those routines. And so they know that when they come into the library, they go immediately to the carpet area and they take their seat. We're going to sing our story time song. We're going to read a book. And then they can look at the schedule to find out what we'll do after that. And so that routine, knowing how that's every day is going to play out the same way. We're always going to go in and sit down and find out what we're doing from there. That really helps the kids to feel comfortable when they come into the library because they know what they're going to expect.
So, Patrick, you started to talk about story time. What has worked for you when it comes to your student seating? I realize you're working with smaller groups of students. I know when I taught kindergarten, gen ed kindergarten, I could have 27 kindergartners. So it was a big class. But what have you done to really make sure that seating isn't a struggle every time the kids come in the space?
Sure. So in my storytime area, we have a carpet that is an alphabet carpet. And so there's 26 letters and then the 4 corners. So we got 30 squares to choose from. And I have 22 students in the classrooms generally. So the first time they come in, I let them kind of sit wherever. I kind of have to figure out their personalities and figure out who's going to fit well. And then I've actually created a seating chart for my students where once we figure out where they're going to be, we keep them in those spots unless we need to kind of move them around for behavior reasons or whatever. And so my students kind of kept the same general spots for the whole year once we figured out where worked best for them. I try to give them enough space. I space them out, 22 kids with the 30 spots, so that they have some space, so they don't have to sit crisscross. They can sit mermaid style, or they can, as long as they're not touching anyone else while they're sitting, as long as they're sitting still and being comfortable, I'm okay with it. I don't make them just sit crisscross just for sitting crisscross. And then we also have, for our special needs students, if they're coming in with the classrooms, we also have plastic cube chairs so that they can sit behind the carpet so they're not blocking the view, but they can sit in those chairs if they have a need to not be sitting on the carpet, if it's difficult for them to get up and down off the carpet, that kind of thing. We have those chairs available also.
Okay, never heard the phrase mermaid style. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. All right, so how about you, Caroline? What works for you when it comes to story time?
Mine is very similar to Patrick's. I also have the big rug with all the alphabet letters on it so that the kids can come and sit down. I actually don't do a seating chart. I personally just can't keep up with it. And because we have so many kids come and go throughout the school year, especially with this age group, because a lot of the parents, especially the gen ed ones, they don't realize when they can start their kids in school. So they'll be like, oh, it's October. I guess we should start. That's cool. And it's a revolving door all year long. We just have kids coming in. So kudos to Patrick for keeping up with the seating charts.
Okay, I can tell you how I did it, though. It wasn't me. I had a binder in my storytime area with a picture of my carpet with the kids' names written, and it was the para's job, because the para's with those students all day long. So if a kid left, they'd go and erase the kid's name. If a new kid came, we'd figure out where to put him and write the name down. So it wasn't me doing it. I put that onto the para so that they were responsible for keeping up with their class. It totally worked. I didn't have to do anything.
I might try that next year. Thank you.
Well, and something that I found, because I had an A to Z carpet, is a randomizer. So whether you're using like popsicle sticks in a cup and you're pulling out letters of the alphabet to do a randomizer, I think once it was made glaringly apparent to me I was being observed, and somebody said, oh, you're calling on the boys too often, or you're only calling on the back row too often. I mean, I wasn't being random enough in making sure that I was calling on as many different kids in the room as possible. And having that I've used a digital randomizer on the screen, and you spin it like a flippity. And, oh, hey, everybody, who's sitting on space number R? Who's on R? And they're like, okay, you're going to answer. Would you like to answer the next question? I give them some freebies at the beginning of class. But no, definitely I always had assigned seats. And that's just part of it is because I changed buildings so often. That's how I was going to learn their names. And sometimes I will say, you want to see kids cry? Watch them fight over who gets to sit where. And I'm speaking to anybody who's going to find themselves teaching littles for the first time. This is something that will ruin their day. If somebody doesn't have an idea of where they're going to sit and all of a sudden it becomes a squabble, you're going to see real life drama being played out in your library because somebody is not going to get invited to somebody else's birthday party because they didn't sit with them at lunch and I don't like you anymore and you're not my best friend. And it is, as funny as it is, it will stop everything you're trying to do when they're fighting over which seat somebody sits in. And I don't know. I'm cowardly. I go for the path of least resistance. Have that battle at the beginning of the school year. And then, you know what? If you switch it up in the middle of the year, that's great. But there's some real drama that comes with who you're sitting next to. How about tables? You know, you mentioned that you do activities at the tables. Caroline, do you have do you have tables like the red table, blue table, green table? Do you have ways to sort of rotate the kids? Or what has worked for you when it comes to teaching preschoolers and the tables where they're going to go to after their story time?
I have 5 round tables. They're pretty large and can seat 6 students around it. And I always have one thing at each table. And in addition to that, I've got a story time, a reading area. So that's nice and cozy with like a beanbag chair, a little reading tent and a cushion, and a bench and some stuffed animals for the kids to read to. Sometimes stuffed animals have to be removed because they're not reading to the stuffed animals, but I always try and give it back to them and give them another chance because that's how we learn. So that's my first center. And then at the tables, I always have some kind of a writing center. Sometimes it looks kind of like a craft, but there's some writing involved. I do try and at least every other week make it more of like a free writing kind of a thing where it's just paper and markers or paper and crayons or something, because I don't think our kids these days get enough time to just explore things like that. I think a lot of the time when they're doing things, like people are telling them what to do and it's not true creation. So I try and give that to them at least every other week. Another table will have some kind of construction activity with like Legos or blocks or something. And I'll, like, if we've read about farm animals, I'll throw some farm animals with it so they can kind of make those connections as well. And then the other 3 tables just have something that's usually connected to the book that we've read. I've got a couple of really great lakeshore pre-made like STEM kits that I'll pull in over there. And I've got like we read about firefighters, I'll put the firehouse out with the fire station and all that so the kids can do things like that. But as far as like the kids going to the tables, since there's usually no more than 22 kids in there at a time, and that's 6 centers for them to choose from, and 3 of them are more or less new every time, and 3 of them are more or less familiar. I just let them go wherever they can fit. And sometimes I do have a center that's wildly popular. Like I do have a vet center that's like pretty huge and has a lot of components to that the kids love. And if there's too many kids going over there will be a kid that'll come up to me and they'll say, I want to go over there and play. And I'll say, go ahead and play. And they'll say, there's no room. And I'll say, then wait for somebody to leave. And they're like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And so I think it's important for them to kind of learn on their own, like when to go over and when to kind of self-regulate that, I guess.
Start to solve their own problems, right? You can't. Oh, absolutely. How about you, Patrick? What has worked for you when it comes to moving the kids to the table areas?
Yeah, so my library is specifically designed for these kids. So all of our tables are lower to the ground. My chairs are 11 inches high that are all around the table. Like they're tiny chairs, like adults sitting in them. It's awkward to get back up. It's crazy. But so my tables are all segmented. So like I have some round tables, but they're really 2 halves that are kind of yin-yang shaped that kind of go together. I have some rectangular-ish tables that kind of fit in between them, so I can extend those rounded tables to put those on the ends of a rectangle to make them longer. Like, so I can mix and match however I choose. Most of the time I have like 5 just round tables where I can fit 4 children around it. And then I have 1 or 2 longer tables where I've put a rectangular piece in the middle and I can fit 6 students at the tables. And so we'll put out the centers. And basically I explain to the kids when we first start the process, like, you're going to go find an open seat and sit down and work at that center. If you get to a table and there isn't an open seat, then you need to find a new center at a different place with an open seat so you can sit there. Because when they visually see that there's no more chairs open, they get, okay, I can't be at that center anymore. And then the other thing that I do as I explain to them that they're going to be there is I explain that they have to stay at that table for 5 minutes. And I show them my phone and I show them that I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes. When that sound goes off, that's when they can choose to move somewhere else. And the reason I do that is because what I found is that if I just said, yeah, you can move to wherever there's an open seat, I had a lot of friends that just bounced from table to table the entire time and never actually did any work in the whole Makerspace time. So if I require them to stay somewhere for 5 minutes first, I get them to at least work for 5 minutes. And then if they move around the rest of the time, then that's their choice. But usually if they're stuck somewhere for 5 minutes, they're going to find something that they can do and enjoy with it. And then maybe they don't move around so much. And so that's kind of how I present it to my students. And once we've practiced it a few times, they really figure it out. And they're like, oh, I can't go there yet. But maybe when someone moves, I can get up and move.
I think that's great. Let's talk about book checkout, because I think that this is where so many people struggle because there are so many moving parts and there's so many parts to doing a book checkout. And especially when we're talking about our littles, it sounds like both of you do book checkout at the end of the visit. Caroline, would you like to speak to that? I mean, when have you found it optimal to do the book checkout?
Well, the way I do book checkout for our self-contained special ed kids, because they're not quite ready to take books home or anything like that, because they can't follow. They're still, like, a lot of their IEPs have like follow one-step directions, so they're not going to be able to take their book home and bring it and read it and bring it back. So for those kids, I just check out books directly to the teachers so that they can have it in their classroom library and they still have access to books. We just don't send them home. For our Gen Ed kids, I do it during our Makerspace time. I call them over to my circulation desk one at a time, and I have a table in front of me at my desk that's a little bit shorter so that the kids can see it on top of it really well. And I've spread out like 20 books face up and let the kids come through and pick something from there. I do also have those particular books I have organized a little bit differently, because our teachers, when we started checking out books, we've only been checking out books for 2 years to go home anyway. And when we started checking them out, a lot of our teachers resisted, and they have resisted since the school opened like 14 years ago. And I can kind of understand it, because as a teacher, if you want to read The Very Hungry Caterpillar, but the kids got it checked out and you don't know when it's coming back, like, those teachers really want it for their curriculum. So I have a separate section that's just for student checkout that's more like princess books and superhero books and things that I know the kids are going to want to read. I also have 2 or 3 bins with that just have a picture of a generic book on it. Those are my books to be weeded that I send home with the kids, because I know there's a good chance they're not going to come back. So those are the ones that actually lay out in front of them to see. And if they want something else, if they say, hey, I really wanted this, Superman book, I'm like, yeah, you go get that Superman book. I don't deny them. That's how I do it, for those Gen Ed kids.
But, that's really fascinating, because, my frustration has always been that teachers aren't relying on my library, that they just say, oh, that's okay, I'll just buy the book so I have it in my room. And I take that as something of a criticism that I don't have the books you need. How else am I supposed to, I internalize this and say, well, what am I doing wrong, But that's fascinating, because you're right, the teachers rely on the resources in the library, and yet we also want to support our students' needs. My personal experience has been my pre-K teachers if the books do go home, the kids, this is kind of fun. Preschool checks out at the end of the day, so they actually dismiss from the library. And the nice thing is then the books go right into their backpacks. And I was able to do that for a couple of years, which was really helpful to the teachers because then that was one last transition for them. The kids came to the library before they dismissed, and they already had their backpacks. The books go in their backpacks, and the problem is solved. The other ones I worked with, all the books went into a milk crate, and that milk crate went into their story center, and then they were able to read the books. And again, tracking those books down became a non-issue because the books always lived in the crate, and then the crate came back. How about you, Patrick? What works for you when it comes to book checkout?
So when I do book checkout, it's kind of organized chaos a little bit. So to start off, to begin with, at the beginning of the year, I don't do book checkout right away. I spend the little bit of time we have in August, all of September, and a portion of October prepping the students for book checkout. So we talk about how to take care of the books. We do multiple book walks and through the library to see where books are, to look at the signage that we have, because I make sure that I have a lot of signs with pictures so that they can see what kind of books are in that area. And we go through and kind of show them where all of those books are. We take the time to do that. We talk about like taking care of the books, and we read books about taking care of books and all of those things. I show them damaged books that we've had from years past that I've kept so that they can see what happens when you get a book wet and that kind of thing. So they can see all of those things so that they're prepared. And then about mid-October, we do our first book checkout, and it's chaos. I make library cards for all of the students. I give them a paint stick, and once they have their card and a paint stick, they go to the bookshelves and they find a book. Like, I've taught them how to use the paint stick. I fill up a cart beforehand, and I show them how to put the stick on the cart and how to pull the book out and leave the stick and then put it back and all of those things. We have all of them practice that with the cart in front of the rest of the kids so they can all see how that works, so that when I let them go, yeah, the shelves are going to get messed up and that kind of thing. But that's part of the fun for them to go look for the book. So I let them do that. So I have 22 to 30 kids going through the shelves looking for books at one time. They bring up their card that I've made for them and their book and their stick, and they hand all three to me. I check the book out to the student, and then the student will take their book to a table where they sit and look at their book for the remaining few minutes that they have before the library time is up. And so we do that. We start that process mid-October. And so every 2 weeks, we have a day where they check out books. For me, it's a little bit different in that they're either coming to me from PE or after library, they're going to PE. And so I have to do kind of different things for each of those groups. The group that's going to PE next, I'm not that mean to my PE teacher where I'm going to send 22 books with kids to the gym. That just seems wrong. So as the student checks out their book, I put a Post-it note on the book with the student's name. And so then they take that to the table so they can read. Once everyone's checked out, all of the students leave the books on the tables. They line up. I collect the books, put them in a stack. And then after that second group that comes in, they leave with the kids that came from PE. When they check out, they're going to leave with their books in hand. They hug their books and walk down the hallway to their classroom where they can put them straight in their backpacks. The class that was in PE, I meet the teacher either in the hallway or run down to the classroom with a stack of books with all the students' names on them, so the teacher knows who checked out which book, and then they all get put into their backpacks that way. We do that process all the way until Christmas break, where they're just keeping them. And honestly, from October to Christmas, they keep the books in their classroom, and it's just practicing taking the books out and returning them to the library. When we get back from winter break is when we start sending the books home with the students. So that way they've had practice. They understand the concept. I don't get to keep this book. I have to bring it back. They've practiced it multiple times at that point. So when we start in the spring, checking books out and sending them home, they understand I need to bring this book back. And I found that works really well because they've already seen, okay, I bring it back.
What I appreciate you breaking it down like that, because I think all too often somebody who finds out they're teaching littles or they're teaching preschool, the idea of sending books home, that first book checkout, I mean, is just insurmountable. Like the idea, like you cannot, it's like going from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Like you absolutely do not expect that all those procedures are going to be in place in September. Do not put that kind of pressure on yourself or those expectations on your students, because that's not pleasant or fun. A couple things I wanted to throw in here. I have a friend whose patron cards are actually the barcode for their checkout is on their shelf stick, and their shelf stick moves with them as they go through school. And she had this fantastic, if you can imagine, it looked like a tray, and there were tumblers for every grade, every class, and all the shelf sticks with the patron cards would go into each of the tumblers according to their, I think the grades had different colors, and each teacher had a tumbler. And so each class, whenever you could double check your attendance, because whichever sticks were not claimed for book checkout, those were kids who weren't in school that day, or they weren't at library that day. And so that was really helpful. And you mentioned about your shelves getting messy. I had a library instructor who was like, look, your room is never going to be clean. Your room is always going to have evidence. If your shelves don't look like people are actively searching them for things to read, then you have made bad choices about the books on your shelves. So you look, if your shelves are always neat, then they're not being used. And when you look and see which parts of your library are getting picked over, that is validating, because I know I had an assistant, so I wasn't necessarily seeing the final result. I wasn't always seeing what kids were always checking out, because I was working with other pockets of kids. But if I could see the messes that they left behind, I was like, oh, that section was very popular today. Oh, that section was very popular today. And to me, like, that helped. I tried to recognize it as, at least I'm doing something right. The kids were going through those books and making choices. So it's all about the kind of the spin that you put on it. Friends, recently we recorded an episode on missing books. It is an opportunity and a challenge all of us face, and one which I'm really curious, how do both of you deal with the issue of missing books? Because when students come to the library and they have their book, well, that's easy, that's obvious. But if you come when kids have, they're empty-handed and they're little, how do you address that? Caroline, what have you found you've had to do when you have students who come back and they have missing books?
Well, that does happen quite a bit with 4-year-olds. When I'm introducing student checkout, I do tell the kids that, they're going to take home a book today, and when they get it, they can put it in their backpack when they take it back to their classroom, and they'll keep it in their backpack all the way home, and they can and should get it out and read it, because that's what books are for. But then I tell them they should put it back in their backpack and just kind of prep them for that, so that it's always in their backpack and ready to go. And that actually does solve about 80% of the missing book problems with 4-year-olds, which I think is pretty good. But other than that, as I'm doing student checkout, because I do it during Makerspace and I call the kids up one at a time, if they have a book already checked out, I will show them the picture of the book and I'll ask them if they know where it is. And actually, most of the time, oddly enough, those 4-year-olds can tell me roughly where it is. Sometimes it's still in their backpack and they just didn't look well enough the first time, but they know it's there. So sometimes that actually just fixes it on its own. But if they don't know where it is, or if it's still at home, then I have a form that I fill out that's just, please help blank, the name of the student, find this book, blank, and thank you, and that's it. And so that the parents have something to refer to. I don't do emails from Destiny or anything, because I don't know, I don't think our parents really get those all that much. Again, because we have so many ESL students and families, I'm just not going to rely on something like that to communicate with my parents. So, but yeah, that works pretty well for me. The other thing that I do, though, is because they're 4, I do have that separate section in my student checkout book. So if a kid is missing a book and they haven't brought it back, I usually just tell them they can still get a book, but it has to be from my pile of books that are to be weeded. And the kids don't know that it's books that are going to be weeded. They just, I have a picture of that just generic blue book sticker on it so that I know which ones they are. And then in Destiny, I have it as a sublocation as student checkout books, which is code for me for books to be weeded so that when I lose them again, because it's gonna happen, I won't be broken up about it.
Sure. No, I like that solution. I know that it is, you don't want to send them home empty-handed. I think that's where more drama happens. How about you, Patrick? What have you found works best for you when it comes to addressing the issue of missing books? Because it happens.
It does. And it seems like this year I had a lot more than most years, which even a lot that I had, I think I lost only like 30 books this year, which is really not a lot at all. But I start prepping the kids about a week before we start doing book checkout. I see the kids, generally I see them twice a week anyway. So on the week before we're going to do book checkout again, I remind them, hey, make sure you're bringing the books back. I send an email to the teachers. They send a message out using Seesaw, which is the platform that they use to generally communicate with parents, to send out that reminder. Hey, books are due back. We're going to do book checkout on this day. Please have your book returned before then, that kind of thing. And so lots of times just by giving them the heads up that it's going to happen, hey, this day we're doing book checkout. I need you to have your book back. That deals with most of the problems. But, we always have those couple kids that for whatever reason, I know a lot of times what happens is that like they'll either leave a backpack in like mom or dad's car, but they're staying with the other parent or something like that. Like it's silly things like that the kids really don't have a lot of control over. So it's not fair to punish those students. So similar to Caroline, I have a section of books. They've already been weeded. I don't leave them in the catalog, but I just have the kids choose from those books so that they can still take a book home. I don't care if that one comes back or not. If it does, great. I'll just put it back on that shelf. But that way the kids still have a book. They're not leaving crying because everyone else had a book and they didn't. They just have a limited selection to choose from. And I find that works really well for most of my students. And most of the time, those books do end up coming back the next time they're at that parent's house, or they'll find it under their bed later that week or whatever. So,
Caroline, Patrick, I am so grateful you both were able to join us today. It is the summer. We should be out enjoying our summer, and you're here recording an episode with me. I'm so grateful. I have to tell you right now, if I were tuning in, I would feel that much better prepared for tackling a job assignment. All too often we're given our job assignments. And if you're teaching our very littles, this is a great way to sort of wrap your head around some of the issues that we're all going to have to face. Caroline, I asked if you're on social media. You said you're not. But I would like to know, if a listener reaches out with a question, could I email you? Would you be comfortable with listeners reaching out if I could share that content with you later? Is that okay?
Absolutely. And I do, because Patrick and I do present at state conferences around Texas, and I always put my email address in there, and I do get emails periodically throughout the year from people with questions about pre-K. So I am always happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Fantastic. And Patrick, I know you are on social media. Would you let us know where we can find you? And likewise, if listeners are looking to follow up with questions, I know that's always appreciated. It's like fan mail.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on TikTok. So that is at LUZR Librarian, so Loser Librarian. And then on Twitter, it's at LU_ZR. And Instagram is also at LU_ZR.
Thank you so much, friends. You're going to want to make sure to take a look at these show notes. Caroline and Patrick, I wish you a fantastic rest of the summer. I know you guys return to work in early August, correct?
The last week in July, the 24th.
July.
Yeah.
Listen, I know that those students are so lucky to have you as librarians. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Friends, when I made the commitment to post content throughout the summer, I did so with the knowledge that there are amazing librarians out there like Patrick and Caroline who are willing to give of their time while everybody's on vacation to make sure that we have episodes coming out. Because, friends, I've heard from listeners throughout the summer who say, thanks so much for posting content. It means a lot because I'm on vacation, but I can still be thinking about ways that I want to engage with my students and my staff in the school year to come. So thank you, as always, to Caroline, to Patrick, and all the librarians who are giving of their time to record with podcast this summer. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out to your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. And friends, you are going to want to make sure to take a look at this week's show notes. If you don't make that a habit, do, because in this case, we've got a whole bunch of resources as well as the elementary playlist. And if you haven't explored the playlist, I strongly advise you do. If you open up that link, which is provided in all of our show notes, SLU playlists, the elementary one in particular, because if you're listening, there's a possibility if you aren't already teaching elementary and teaching our littles, you will be soon. And we've got tons of episodes, including 45 Minutes Feels Like Forever, Littles in Our Library, Genrefication in an Elementary Library, Elementary Programming, Library Learning Commons, Pushing into Classrooms, Teaching Littles in Our Library, Family Outreach, Storytime Strategies, Accelerated Reader, Greatest Hits, as well as Elementary Genrefication and Empowering Elementary Students. These are fantastic episodes, each done by librarians with a wealth of experience working with our youngest patrons. One last friendly reminder, friends, use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more. And especially with your budgets opening up in the next few weeks, this is an opportunity you can take advantage of again and again and again. And schedule your first Literati Book Fair by July 31st for this fall 2023 and receive a $500 Titlewave gift card. As always, there are links in the show notes. The topic of our next episode will be library orientation and my conversation with Diana Rendina. I hope you will tune in.